So we're starting off with this basic application that you can see we're displaying a question and we're displaying the different potential answers for that question. And then on the left side of my editor, what we've got going on here is basically we're displaying the question right here. We then go and loop over each one of the answers for that question or potential answers. And then we're checking a few things. First off, we're checking, was this the user's answer? We'll default that to false. We're also checking if the question has actually been answered. And then we can determine if a question has been answered by checking this.state.userAnswer, which will be updated when we press one of these answers in the future. At that point, we'll go ahead and say answered is true, regardless if they're right or wrong. And then for was user answer, we can go ahead and check if the answer.answer, which we're currently looking at, so a log cabin in Kentucky, is equal to whatever the user supplied. So whatever the user supplied is whatever they tapped. We then go ahead and right now we're just rendering out text. But if I go ahead and look at a screenshot, we can see what we're actually working up to. We can see that here we've got, well, this would be the state where the question has been answered. So if a question hasn't been answered, this text is all going to look the same and there's not going to be the number of correct answers out of total answers displayed. So this is going to be the state after they've answered. And you can see we've got this bolded text. This is a tappable row, so a user can decide what is their actual answered question. And then we're displaying how many of this answer of total answers have actually been chosen. And then in the future videos, we're actually going to make an animated bar to go ahead and represent this 8 out of 41 or whatever it may be, just to make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more interesting to look at. But right now we're just going to work up towards this ending point. So if we look at this, we know there's more than just a single text element. So what we're going to do is break each one of these rows out into its own component that we're going to call QuestionRow. And we can see a few of the pieces of information we need for this component. First off, what is the actual text that we should be displaying? We need to know how many total answers there were. We need to know how many of this answer there were. To determine if a question should be bolded or not, we need to know if this was the user's answer. We also need to know, was the question answered? And finally, we actually need to decide what happens when that presses. So those are just kind of a few of the things we'll do going into this component. And that's just kind of the way I think about looking at a quick mock-up. How do I want to go ahead and break that up into a component? So with all that said, let's go back to the editor and go ahead and create our new QuestionRow component. Over here, I've got a basic application structure. I'm just going to put this new component in components. So I'll say QuestionRow.js. And for right now, all I'm going to do is say export default, a function that returns null. And this is a valid component just so we can go ahead and wire this into place. So back into index.js, we'll go to the top of this file. We'll import QuestionRow from .components QuestionRow. We'll then scroll down back to where we're rendering everything out. And we're going to go ahead and replace this return text with this new QuestionRow component. So first thing we know we need to add is the key. And this is there. It needs to be something unique, and it's there just to keep React happy so that it can work efficiently when it's got an array of data to be rendered. Okay, and let's just go ahead and add a few of those things we talked about before. First off, we're going to add the answer that's going to be displayed. So that's, again, answer.answer. We also want to pass the answered Boolean, which we've set up here. Again, we'll do this was user answer. We'll pass this down. And this will be enough for us to actually get started. So with this done, nothing's going to be rendered. Now we can go ahead and start defining this QuestionRow component. First, I'm going to import React because we're using JSX and React has to be in scope for this. I'm then going to import from React Native the view and text components so we can go ahead and start rendering data out. We'll go ahead and say export default class QuestionRow. This should be a lowercase c. QuestionRow extends react.component. And we'll set up our render method to start rendering things out. So we've got a few different pieces of information we're going to want to style. So I'm going to go ahead, wrap this all in a view, and then inside of here, we'll go ahead and use text. First thing we'll render is the this.answer, and that's just going to be the text that should be rendered. And you can see we've got that down. We'll also go ahead and render Okay, so that's the basic piece done. Let's go ahead and go back to index, and we're going to add a few more pieces of data to this just to make it more interesting, and so we have all the data necessary. Two things we're going to want to add are our answer responses, and that's just going to be the number of answers for this specific question that we're looking at. The other thing we're going to add is total responses, and this is going to come from question.totalResponses. Let's go ahead and look at this data quickly. If I go to my data, you can see we've got total responses for a question, and then we've got an answer count, which we'll actually go ahead and modify when an answer is pressed. But go ahead, just check out the code. You can see the full code. There's a link down below to see how we're actually modifying this state. So going back to QuestionRow now, we know that we've got additional data. This time it's going to be this.props.answerResponses, and that's going to be out of this.props.totalResponses. We'll see that we've got out of 40, look, this should be an S. So we've got 7 out of 40, 3 out of 40, perfect. Now this should only be displayed when this question has been answered. So I'll go ahead and wrap this by saying this.props.answered, and then we can add those 2 ampersands in there, and basically if this question has been answered, we'll go ahead and render this. So at this point, since the question hasn't been answered, we're not going to see that information. So next thing we need to do is actually add a way to answer questions. So first we'll make the entire row tappable, so we'll add a touchable opacity around it. We'll go ahead and add touchable opacity and wrap this entire component that we had inside of here. We're also going to want to pass an onPress, and this is just going to come from this.props.onPress. So with that, we need to actually define onPress from where we're calling it. I'll go back to here, we've got QuestionRow, and then I'll define an onPress prop, and we can say this.handleAnswer, which is what we want to actually be called when an answer is called. And actually going back down to the question row, we're going to want to call this a little bit different. So if you see that when the user answers, we're passing them whatever they actually tapped. So we need to go ahead and pass that information to the function when it's being called. So we'll go ahead and say, define a function and actually call this, and we'll go ahead and pass answer as an argument to that function. So if I save this, let's go ahead and tap one of these rows, and you can see once we tap it, that information is actually showing up for us. Now, this component isn't quite as nice looking as I would like it to be, so we'll go ahead and start doing a bit of styling. So I'll import style sheet from React Native. Then I'm just going to say const styles is equal to style sheet.create. And we'll go ahead and start by styling the answer text. So I'll say text style is equal to styles.answer text. And then our answer text is just going to have some basic styles. Again, you can check this out in the final code or just pause the video to see exactly what I've written here. So I will save this, and all right, our text is looking good. When we tap this item though, the text isn't becoming bold when it's actually tapped. So let's go ahead and add a style for this. And for this, I'll say answer bold text. And basically the only thing we're going to change here is the font family. So now what we can do to actually define this, since this text is going to inherit the answer text styles, the only thing that's going to change when it's the user's answer is adding the bold text. We're going to pass an array of styles to our answer text. So I'll just wrap this in an array. Let's go ahead and put this on separate lines. Okay, so what's going to happen here, as a second part of our array, we can say this.props.userAnswer. Remember, user answer is going to be, or rather, this is going to be was user answer. So this is just a Boolean deciding whether this was the user's answer or not. And if that was the case, then we'll go ahead and also apply styles.answer bold text. We'll save this. And now when we tap a button, you can see we've got the bold item for whichever row the user is tapping. All right, let's go ahead and add some styles to the actual number count. So again, on the text component, we'll add a style. This is going to be styles.answer row text. And then we'll go ahead and define this answer row text. And saving this, we'll go ahead, tap the button, and you can see we've got the styles we actually want. Okay, things are feeling a little cramped on the sides, and we want everything to stay consistent, so we're going to add a new style to this containing view that's containing all of our text. And I'm going to say styles.inner row, and then inner row, all we're going to do is add a margin horizontal 10. And you can see that just kind of pulls everything away from the sides a little bit. Now let's go ahead and add a little bit of vertical space because this is very squashed. So going up to our touchable opacity, I'll go ahead and add a style, which I'm going to call styles.row. Then we can go ahead and define this. I'm going to give this a padding vertical of 10 just so that's inside. We're also going to add a margin horizontal of -10, and that's just going to help everything kind of make sure we've got the biggest touchable area possible. So this is basically directly contradicting this one, just so our content is laid out correctly, but our button's as large as possible. I also want to add some borders to this, so I'm going to say border bottom width. That's going to be 1, and then border bottom color. And you can see now we've got each one of these rows separated a little bit. Now you can see here, we can actually go ahead and change our answers, and that's throwing everything off. So something we can do, going back to our touchable opacity, we can add another prop. And it's called disabled, so you can just disable an input. And I'm going to say this.props.answered. So if the answer is answered, the input's disabled, we can no longer actually press that. Now when we press an answer, it's no longer there. Okay, another thing we want to take care of is you can see when we tap this, our rows are growing, and we don't want that to happen. So we'll go ahead and just put a basic height in for this answer row. That'll just be blank when nothing's actually rendered there. So what I want to do, basically take this content that we'll actually be displaying in that row. I'm going to wrap this in a new view. And again, we'll apply a style, and I'll call this styles.answer row. And then answer row is just going to be given a height of 30. And if we look at the answer row text, our line height is 25, so that lines up pretty well. Now you can see nothing's there. When we go ahead and choose an answer, just the text is popping up. It's not changing the layout or anything. Okay, I think we only have one more thing to do, and that's basically to add a border on top on the first row, just so it's consistent throughout. So first off, what I'm going to do is below my row, I'm going to add a border top, and basically I'll just copy this border bottom width and border bottom color, and we can say border top. And I'm going to change border bottom and border to just border top width and border color. So now we actually need to use this. And what we can do is if we pass the index of wherever we are in this array, we can use that to say if the index is 0, then go ahead and render this. And you can see that's the second argument to a map function. So what I'll do now is I'll just pull this out into a separate variable. We can call this const row style. And we'll set that to an array, and that'll just be that styles.row. So now we'll say if this.props.index is equal to 0, so if it's the first element, we can say row style dot push styles.border top. So all the other ones will have border bottom, just the first one will also have a border top. So we'll add row style there. And you can see we've got that in place. Now when we tap a button, we've got this bolded text, we've got our display text down here. If we go ahead and compare this to our mockup, you can see that, in fact, everything looks the same, and we're ready to move on to actually adding our animation bar in the next video. If you want this code, be sure to check out the links down below. And if you're interested in learning more about React Native, check out learn.handlebarlabs.com or the Handlebar Labs YouTube channel to see more React Native videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.